Sunday, July 19th, 1998. The quiet community of Henderson, Nevada, a suburb of Las Vegas, was suddenly shattered when the lives of two couples, Gavin and Emma Chambers and Wayne and Jess Sturbridge, became forever intertwined in a complex and tragic tale involving obsession, remorse, deceit, and ultimately murder. Gavin Chambers, 35, a well-established local investment counselor, was married to Emma, 34, a successful graphic artist. Wayne Sturbridge, 36, a computer scientist, and his wife Jess, 33, a travel agent, were close friends of the Chambers. But these two couples shared more than just friendship. They were swingers, couples who engage in a sexual arrangement that involves swapping partners. Initially, this unconventional lifestyle, also known as wife swapping, brought passion and excitement into their lives. But beneath the surface, the arrangement would create a dangerous mix of jealousy, obsession, and hatred. Over time, Gavin's interest in Jess evolved into an overwhelming obsession, causing tension in his relationship with Emma. And when Jess became alarmed by the intensity of Gavin's growing obsession with her, she decided to end the affair. A decision that would set off a tragic chain of events that would eventually spiral out of control into murder. At the time, the Chambers had known each other since high school and had been happily married for more than 10 years. To their friends and family, they appeared to be the perfect couple, seemingly happy and deeply in love. They resided in a nice home in the picturesque community of Ponderosa Court, having moved there only a few years after getting married. The Sturbridges came to the community only a year after Gavin and Emma, and living only around the corner from each other, the two couples quickly became friends. The friendship between the two couples seemed like a natural fit. Gavin Chambers and his wife Emma were both outgoing and fun-loving, while Wayne and Jess Sturbridge were easygoing and soft-spoken. Together, they would go on outings together, enjoying the theater, dinners, dancing, and all of the nightlife that the Las Vegas area has to offer. One evening in late 1997, the idea of swapping partners arose during a holiday dinner party held at the Chambers' house. After enjoying a few rounds of drinks after dinner together, the topic of swinging came up, which sparked a spirited conversation that eventually led to an agreement between the couples to try it as an experiment. So that very evening, the couples exchanged partners, with Gavin and Jess spending the night together in the Chambers' home, while Wayne and Emma went back to spend the night together at the Sturbridges' house. As the couples explored their sexuality with their new partners, the arrangement was seen as something fun and exciting, a chance to inject a fresh sense of thrill and rejuvenation into their marriages. Soon, swinging became a regular part of their weekends and holidays. However, as time passed, the dynamics in the relationships between the four slowly started to change. Gavin Chambers especially seemed to be most affected by the arrangement. He became more and more enamored with Jess, his interest eventually becoming a troubling and unhealthy, all-consuming obsession. At first, Gavin's growing interest in Jess was just seen as a part of the thrill of swinging by the others, and by his wife Emma. But in time, Emma Chambers began to become concerned about her husband's growing obsession, as it began to take over his thoughts and actions. Gavin began to neglect his work, spending less and less time at his office, and finding more excuses to have to see and talk to Jess. Gavin's growing interest in Jess also caused Emma to become jealous of Jess's newfound hold over her husband. The once novel and exciting arrangement began to fall apart, which would eventually affect everyone in ways none of them could have ever imagined. Emma, by now fully sensing that something had gone very wrong in her relationship with her husband, started to observe Gavin more closely. Her suspicions heightened when she noticed how her husband would stare longingly at Jess during gatherings, indicating a growing fixation. Jess, initially flattered by the attention and oblivious to Gavin's obsession, soon became uncomfortable with Gavin's increasingly possessive behavior. She confided in Wayne about her concerns, but he dismissed them, attributing Gavin's actions to natural and understandable displays of interest and affection given their arrangement. But Jess's increasing discomfort with Gavin would not go away. Her suspicions peaked during a weekend retreat the two couples took together to a resort at Lake Tahoe in March 1998, where Gavin's obsession became more evident. He isolated Jess, showing a preference for her company over others. One evening, Gavin asked Jess to take a walk with him in the woods. As they strolled together alone, he made a startling admission. He said that he wanted to abandon everything to start a new life with her. Initially, Jess laughed off the comment as a joke, but was taken aback and badly shaken by the seriousness of Gavin's remarks. As Gavin's behavior became more erratic, he began to seek Jess out beyond the couple's agreed-upon arranged meetings. Jess became deeply concerned. Eventually, she decided to end the couple's wife-swapping arrangement in the hopes of protecting her marriage with Wayne and their friendship with the Chambers. But things were not to go the way that Jess had hoped. Meanwhile, Emma was growing increasingly jealous and frustrated with the situation. Gavin continued his pursuit of Jess, even after she discontinued the couple's wife-swapping arrangement. Each time that Gavin would approach her, Jess firmly rejected his advances, despite Gavin's urgent pleas and his attempts to persuade her otherwise. For her, the affair between the two couples was over, and she was determined to move on. In the aftermath, Jess avoided Gavin, hoping that he would eventually realize the futility of his interest in her. But it was all to no avail. Gavin refused to let go of the situation, and his obsession with Jess only deepened. He began to appear at the travel agency where Jess worked, leading to unwelcome advances which only escalated the tension between the two. One afternoon, as Jess was arriving back to her home from work, Gavin confronted her, desperately pleading with her to reconsider their arrangement. But Jess stood firm and refused. As tensions mounted between the two, Emma, who was working in her garage, overheard the argument and came upon the scene. She realized then that their once fun experiment had now become a horrible mistake, and that she would have to intervene if things were to change.
Hey cold case crime solvers, like our cold case stories? Then be sure to like and subscribe. And do you have a cold case you'd like us to investigate? Let us know in the comments. Until then, cold case crime solvers.
Emma immediately confronted Gavin and Jess, demanding an explanation, as her jealousy and rage against Jess began to well within her. The sudden presence of Emma gave Jess the opportunity to go into her house, wanting only to get away from the situation. Now alone with her husband, Emma knew that their lives had been irreversibly altered, and ever loyal to her husband, she blamed Jess. The couple's wife-swapping relationship had reached an irreversible breaking point due to Gavin's obsession with Jess, and Emma began to blame Jess and her decision to terminate the arrangement as the precipitating cause, setting off a chain of events that could not be undone. Badly shaken by this incident, Jess sought out Emma to ask for her help and guidance. But Emma, now driven by jealousy and resentment towards her newly perceived rival, rebuffed all of Jess's attempts at cooperation. As the dust settled, Gavin's altercation with Jess had left him in a state of utter confusion and turmoil, with Jess's resolute rejection and Emma's unexpected intervention shaking him to his core. As he was led back home by Emma, Gavin's mind was engulfed in a whirlwind of anger, fear, and desperation. Perceiving the storm brewing within him, Emma played to his emotions by blaming Jess for everything. In the days that followed, Gavin became increasingly erratic, swinging between anger and depression as he fixated on Jess's rejection and her perceived betrayal of him and their wife-swapping arrangement. Emma too grappled with her own frustration, while her jealousy and anger towards Jess increased. Meanwhile, Jess was determined to move forward. She avoided both Gavin and Emma altogether, while she prioritized her work and re-establishing a monogamous relationship with her husband Wayne. While telling him that she was no longer interested in the wife-swapping arrangement, Jess refrained from disclosing the full extent of Gavin's obsession to Wayne, who was still completely oblivious to the situation, as she feared the fallout that might occur if Wayne were to know. By the evening of Friday, July 17th, 1998, Gavin Chambers had become more and more paranoid about the situation. He began to drink heavily. His thoughts turned ominous, and he became convinced that suicide was the only solution to his inner turmoil. Emotionally distraught and in a drunken rage, he ventured into his and his wife Emma's bedroom. There he found Emma, who convinced him instead that Jess was the problem. Together, the two came up with a plan to rid themselves of Jess, setting the stage for a dark alliance born out of fear and obsession. That very night, at Emma's urging, Gavin broke into the Sturbridges' home while Wayne was away on a week-long business trip. There, Gavin confronted Jess in her sleep and stabbed her to death in a fit of rage. Once the deed was done, Emma swiftly took charge of the situation. She guided Gavin to their bathroom and instructed him to remove his clothes and cleanse himself of the blood. The urgency of their predicament consumed her thoughts, as she knew that they had to act quickly to cover up the crime and safeguard their hidden life. As Gavin showered the blood off of him, Emma gathered his clothes and put them in a garbage bag. She carefully scrubbed the floor where he had walked, eradicating any trace of the gruesome act. Once Gavin was clean, she sat him down and together, the two went over every detail of the incident. Emma then activated the next detail in their plan. They needed to establish an alibi and dispose of any evidence linking them to the crime. She reached out to a trusted family member, her sister Anne, fabricating a story that she and Gavin had been in her company throughout the evening and solidifying their alibi. Then she drove to a secluded location outside of town where she incinerated Gavin's bloodstained clothes and buried the murder weapon, praying that this would destroy any remaining evidence of the crime. The murder of Jess Sturbridge remained undiscovered until the morning of Sunday, July 19, 1998, when Wayne Sturbridge returned home from his business trip. Horrified, he called 911 and the police, led by Detective Robert Walters, were quickly dispatched to the scene. What they found was a gruesome scene. Jess had been stabbed 26 times, murdered while sleeping in her own bed. As the police began to gather evidence, they interrogated everyone in the neighborhood, including the Chambers. Wayne Sturbridge was also interrogated, but neither he nor the Chambers gave the police any hints about their previous wife-swapping arrangement. For Wayne, his silence on the subject was out of a sense of shame and embarrassment, but for the Chambers, their silence was out of necessity, namely, the fear of being implicated in the murder. Emma's meticulously crafted alibi withstood scrutiny, and Gavin, though visibly distressed, managed to evade suspicion. Yet, unbeknownst to either of them, the police had little to work with. The case was initially believed to be a home invasion or break-in gone wrong, but with no discernible leads, after a year of investigation, it went cold. Yet despite their initial success in evading the authorities, the psychological burden of the murder weighed heavily on both Gavin and Emma. Gavin, the more emotionally unstable and fragile of the two, grew increasingly paranoid, convinced that the police were closing in on him. He distanced himself from friends and colleagues, isolating himself in a web of fear and regret. Emma, though outwardly composed, also felt the strain of their secret weighing upon her. She became hypervigilant, scrutinizing every interaction and behavior for signs of suspicion from those around them. The 12 months following Jess Sturbridge's murder rapidly blurred into a constant state of tension and deception for the Chambers. Emma assumed the role of stabilizer, managing Gavin's growing paranoia while ensuring that their public facade remained intact. She was one of the first people to comfort Wayne on his loss, while at the same time carefully monitoring the news for any updates on the investigation. However, Emma knew that maintaining their cover required more than just an alibi. They needed to construct a narrative that would divert attention away from Gavin. She suggested to Gavin that he should appear more distraught over Jess's death, aligning with the community's grief and deflecting suspicion at social gatherings and community meetings. Gavin, by now completely under the control of his wife, dutifully played the part of the grieving friend, speaking of Jess at her funeral with a mixture of fondness and sorrow, his eyes often welling up with tears. Wayne Sturbridge, devastated by the loss and desperate for answers, seemed to appreciate Gavin's empathy, oblivious to his friend's involvement in his wife's demise. But despite Emma's carefully crafted instructions and stage managing, Gavin's fragile mental state deteriorated further, his guilt manifesting in nightmares and hallucinations. He turned to heavy drinking as a means of temporary escape, but it provided no solace, only exacerbating his turmoil. Fearing that Gavin might confess in a drunken stupor, Emma kept a constant vigil over him, often staying up late to ensure he didn't leave the house. One evening, as Gavin slumped over a glass of whiskey, he broke down and confessed to Emma that he could no longer bear the guilt and needed to come clean. Panicked, Emma tried to calm him, desperate to maintain their composure. She proposed they should take a trip far away, seeking refuge in a secluded cabin located deep in the White Mountains of New Hampshire. The change of scenery was intended to help Gavin find some semblance of peace. The isolation offered them a temporary respite, allowing them to strategize their next moves without the constant pressure of the investigation hanging over them. During their time at the cabin, Emma continued to coach her husband, emphasizing the importance of secrecy and instructing him on how to handle police questioning and public interactions, drilling him constantly until he could respond without hesitation. Emma's unwavering determination to protect her husband and avoid imprisonment fueled her relentless drive to keep their story consistent. Upon returning to Henderson after 3 months away, the Chambers resumed their lives with a renewed sense of purpose. Though still haunted by his actions, Gavin managed to present a more composed demeanor. Emma continued to carefully stage-manage their interactions with their friends and coworkers in the community, ensuring that they remained above suspicion. However, in spite of all of their best efforts, within a month of their returning to Henderson, the cracks in their facade began to show. Friends and neighbors noticed Gavin's increased drinking, shaking hands, and erratic behavior, and as the case went cold, whispers of his possible involvement in Jess's death began to surface. The turning point in the case came quite suddenly and unexpectedly in August of 1999, more than a year after the murder. Having heard the rumors of his involvement, Gavin, now overwhelmed by guilt and desperate to come clean, made the pivotal decision to turn himself in to the authorities and confess to his crime. However, Emma, fearing the consequences, intervened, leading to a tense confrontation that spiraled out of control. After Gavin declared that his decision to go forward to the police was irrevocable, Emma, desperate to stop him, physically tried to restrain him. As the two struggled, Gavin became more agitated and violent, culminating in him strangling Emma to death. Once his violent rage had subsided, Gavin composed himself and calmly walked into the nearest police station. There, he emotionally recounted the last year, admitting to the wife-swapping arrangement, his obsession with Jess, and her eventual murder at his hands. Strangely, however, Gavin did not immediately mention Emma's murder at all until the police obtained a search warrant on his home, where they found her body. Gavin's brutal murder of his wife and his confession to the murder of Jess Sturbridge marked a turning point in the unraveling of the complex web of deceit and tragedy that had engulfed the lives of the Chambers and Sturbridges. Normally, a confession would be enough for authorities to file a charge of murder, but due to Gavin's perilous mental state, Detective Walters decided to proceed cautiously. He needed independent, concrete evidence that would support Gavin's confession and link him to the crime, so he reopened the Jess Sturbridge case and meticulously began a re-examination of the evidence. The Chambers' home was searched, which led to the discovery of traces of Jess's blood, which had seeped into the floorboards, despite Emma's thorough cleaning. A forensic analysis of Jess's phone records was also undertaken, which revealed a series of desperate text messages from Gavin, demonstrating his unhealthy obsession with Jess. Neighbors were also re-interviewed. One neighbor, Tasha Farrow, was able to identify Gavin's presence near the Sturbridge residence on the night of the murder. With this evidence in hand, combined with Gavin's own confession, police were finally able to build a damning case against him. In November 1999, the trial of Gavin Chambers began in a crowded courtroom in the Clark County Courthouse in Las Vegas. Gavin Chambers, once a successful investment counselor and well-established member of the community, was charged with 1 count of first-degree murder for the murder of Jess Sturbridge and 1 count of second-degree murder for the strangulation murder of his wife Emma. Gavin pled guilty to both counts. Due to his full confession, he avoided the death penalty and received a life sentence without the possibility of parole. Gavin is currently serving his sentence at the Ely State Prison near Ely, Nevada. The aftermath of the trial found the community of Henderson struggling to heal from the scars left by the murders. Wayne Sturbridge, left to pick up the pieces of his shattered life, found some solace in Gavin's confession and conviction, but continued to mourn the loss of his beloved wife. Deeply regretting the wife-swapping arrangement he had once been an enthusiastic participant in, he moved out of the area, determined to restart his life. Eventually, he remarried and resettled in California, where he now lives with his wife and daughter. The tragic case of Jess Sturbridge is a sad reminder of the dangers of obsession and the fragility of life, love, and mental health.